The humans would all be raped and killed if Anthony Murphy and his defenders failed to repel the alien invaders. And that, my young pupils, is why you never underestimate humans, Pixis said, his wrinkled gray skin crinkling as he settled into the chair, his long white beard nearly reaching his lap. The Tellarite students leaned forward in the dimly lit classroom. The year was 2257. The Tellarite Confederation had just discovered a small planet on the edge of their space. It had almost no inhabitants, but was rich in valuable minerals and ore. The greedy Tellarite High Council couldn't resist and sent 50 tough miners, led by Commander Xylo, to start mining the planet's resources. Xylo was known for his ruthless ambition and cruel tactics to get what he wanted. However, as the alien miners landed and started drilling, they found something unexpected. A tiny settlement of humans hidden in a remote valley. It had only 100 people living in a few dozen cheap prefab colony structures. These humans were called the Nova Concordat, a breakaway rebel faction who had fled the constant wars and chaos on Earth, trying to start over on this lost little world. The Tellarites had never seen humans in person before and figured the small band of settlers would be primitive, backward, and helpless against Tellarite firepower. Commander Xylo was annoyed that these pitiful humans were in the way of his mission. He ordered his troops to storm the human settlement with plasma drills and stun batons, intending to forcibly clear out the humans and take all their meager supplies and resources. However, the Tellarites were in for a shock. As they approached the human encampment, it turned out these settlers weren't so defenseless after all. Mixed in with the civilians was a hardened squad of human special forces, led by Anthony Murphy, a legendary veteran of Earth's bloodiest war. As the Tellarites closed in on the human settlement, Anthony Murphy and his outnumbered human defenders geared up to fight back. They were all that stood between the civilians and a horrible fate at the hands of the ruthless alien invaders. The stakes couldn't be higher. If Murphy failed, the Tellarites would subjugate and brutalize the helpless humans. This would be a defining moment in the Nova Concordat's struggle for survival on the edge of space. Pixis's eyes gleamed as he continued his tale, the students leaning in even closer. The Tellarite forces thought they would stomp out the humans like bugs under their boots. But they didn't count on Anthony Murphy and his fighters. Sure, there were only a couple dozen of them against 50 Tellarites, but these were no ordinary humans. Murphy's squad was equipped with advanced kinetic rifles and personal energy shields, tech the Tellarites had never seen before. The humans formed a perimeter around their settlement and opened fire as the aliens closed in, their weapons punching through the Tellarite armor like it was made of paper. Xylo watched in disbelief as his troops fell, the few survivors retreating back to camp. But Murphy didn't let up. He led the humans in lightning guerrilla raids, hitting the aliens' mining equipment and supply depot. The Tellarites were taking heavy losses while the humans stayed safe behind their energy shields. Xylo was furious that his operation was being torn apart by a few primitives. Humans, in a fit of rage, called upon Xylo to request reinforcements from the Taurite Confederation. That's when the TCS Zorks appeared in orbit, carrying 200 of the fiercest Taurite shock troops led by Commander KRX. This brute KRX was here for blood. KRX and his goons beamed down, armed with rocket launchers and plasma cannons, ready to incinerate every human they saw. Murphy knew his small band stood no chance against this many bloodthirsty aliens. As the Taurites marched on the settlement, prepared to slaughter everyone inside, Murphy had one last desperate idea. He dusted off an old Earth military radio and started broadcasting an SOS, praying to reach any human ship out there. Anything to save his people from being massacred by the Kralak. Pixis paused dramatically, his eyes shining with anticipation. Then someone heard that call. The UNSS Valiant, one of Earth's most powerful battle cruisers, was passing nearby, commanded by none other than the legendary Admiral Aurora Stanton. Admiral Stanton was a real hero, Pixis said, his voice filled with admiration. When that distress call came in from Murphy, she didn't hesitate for a second. She ordered the Valiant crew to push those fusion engines to the max, redlining them to get to that planet as fast as possible. The students were on the edge of their seats now, hanging on Pixis's every word. The Valiant dropped out of warp right on top of the Zorks. Stanton hailed them immediately, ordering KRX to stand down and withdraw his troops, but that brute just laughed in her face. Next thing you know, the Zorks launched a volley of plasma torpedoes, hammering the Valiant's shields. Pixis shook his head, remembering the intensity of the moment. But Stanton, she's a hell of a pilot. She had the Valiant dancing and weaving, evading most of the barrage, but they still took some hits, shields starting to buckle. Down on the surface, Murphy and his few remaining defenders were making their last stand. KRX himself was leading the charge, Taurite shock troopers storming the human perimeter. Murphy's soldiers fought like demons, kinetic rifles blazing, energy shields flaring as they absorbed the incoming fire. But they were being pushed back, step by bloody step. Pixis leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. That's when the vanguard arrived. Stanton beamed them down right into the thick of it. A dozen Marines in state-of-the-art exoskeletons wielding pulse rifles that could cut a Taurite in half. They hit the shock troopers like a hammer, scattering their formations, cutting them down by the dozens. KRX saw the tide turning. He ordered a retreat, his troops falling back to their shuttles. The vanguard pursued, harrying them all the way back to the Zorks. Pixis paused, catching his breath. The room was utterly silent, the students completely enraptured. But the battle wasn't over yet. Up in orbit, the Valiant and the Zorks were trading blows, each ship blasting away at the other's shields. Stanton knew she had to end this and fast, so she gave the order to board the Zorks. Pixis grinned, his eyes twinkling. And who do you think led that boarding party? None other than Anthony Murphy himself. He'd beamed up to the Valiant in the middle of the ground battle, ready to take the fight to KRX on his own turf. Murphy was a real hero, I tell you, Pixis said, his voice filled with admiration. He and his team of Marines infiltrated that Taurite ship like ghosts. They moved through those corridors silent as shadows, taking out the crew before they even knew what hit them. The students were leaning forward now, hanging on Pixis's every word. Murphy was like a man possessed. He fought his way to the bridge, determined to take down the brute KRX once and for all. When he got there, it was a sight to behold. Pixis's eyes sparkled as he recounted the confrontation. Calx was a big one, towering over Murphy. But size isn't everything. Murphy had speed, agility, and years of training on his side. They clashed on that bridge in a whirlwind of fists and fury. Murphy ducked under KRX's heavy blows, landing quick jabs to the Taurite's thick hide. KRX roared in frustration, his attacks becoming more wild and desperate. But Murphy stayed cool, waiting for his moment. Pixis paused, letting the tension build. Then, with a move so fast you'd miss it if you blinked, Murphy swept KRX's legs out from under him. The big Taurite crashed to the deck, and before he could recover, Murphy was on him, locking him in a chokehold until the fight went out of him. The classroom was utterly silent, the students holding their breath. With KRX captured and the Zorax under human control, Admiral Stanton wasted no time. She hailed the Taurite High Council, laying down the law. Withdraw from the planet, agree to a ceasefire, or face the consequences. Pixis chuckled, shaking his head. Those Taurites are a proud bunch, but even they knew when they were beat. Faced with the might of the UNSC, they had no choice but to agree to Stanton's terms. Pixis leaned back in his chair, a faraway look in his eyes. That incident changed everything. The Taurites realized they weren't the biggest fish in the pond anymore, and the humans showed they weren't to be trifled with. In the weeks that followed, human diplomats arrived on Dela Prime, led by Ambassador Nicholas Petro, a shrewd negotiator. Petro was determined to forge a lasting peace between our peoples. Pixis smiled, his gaze returning to the students. And that, my young ones, is how a small band of humans led by the brave Anthony Murphy stood against the might of the Taurite Confederation and emerged victorious. It's a lesson we should all take to heart. Never underestimate the tenacity and courage of the human spirit. The old Taurite paused, letting his words sink in. The students sat in rapt attention, their minds filled with visions of daring space battles and heroic stands. Pixis leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But the story doesn't end there. Oh no, the events set in motion by Murphy's stand would have far-reaching consequences, rippling across the galaxy like a stone thrown into a still pond. And it all started with what happened next in those tense negotiations on Delaprime. Pixis's voice grew heavy as he continued the tale. But alas, my young ones, the peace Ambassador Petro sought to forge was not to last. The old Territe shook his head, eyes distant with memory. You see, not all Territes were ready to accept this new era of cooperation. There were those who still clung to the old ways, to the belief in Territe supremacy. Chief among them was General Zortex, a ruthless militarist with a deep resentment for humanity. He saw the peace negotiations not as a new beginning, but as a betrayal of all the Territe Confederation stood for. Pixis leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Zorx gathered his followers, hardliners who shared his vision of a Taurite-dominated galaxy. In a swift and brutal coup, they overthrew the High Council and seized control of the government. The first act of Zorx's rule was to denounce the peace treaty. The second was to declare war on Earth and all its colonies. The students gasped, their eyes wide with shock. Pixis nodded grimly. The attack came without warning. Taurite ships, armed with technology reverse-engineered from captured human equipment, struck at key UNC installations. Colonies burned, and thousands died. The UNC, caught off guard, reeled from the blow, but they had a champion ready to lead the fight back. Anthony Murphy, the hero of Murphy's Stand, now a high-ranking officer. Pixis's voice swelled with pride as he spoke of Murphy's counteroffensive. Murphy rallied the human forces. Under his leadership, they engaged the Taurites in a series of bloody battles across the stars, from the skies of New Carthage to the asteroid fields of Gamma Leonis. Humans and Taurites clashed in a titanic struggle for survival. Despite the UNC's valiant efforts, the tide began to turn. The Taurites' numbers and advanced technology proved too much. One by one, human colonies fell. Pixis paused, the weight of history heavy on his shoulders. In a final desperate gamble, Murphy assembled a team of the UNC's best and brightest for a daring mission. To infiltrate Taurite Prime itself and capture General Zorx, cutting the head off the Taurite war machine. It was a mission from which Murphy and most of his team would not return. But their sacrifice was not in vain. Zorx was captured, and with his defeat, the war ended. The Taurite Confederation, its leadership in ruins, fell into chaos and civil war. Pixis looked up at his students, his eyes glistening. And so ended the war we now know as Murphy's War. A bittersweet victory for humanity, one that came at a terrible cost. The UNC was left weakened and vulnerable, but thanks to the courage and sacrifice of heroes like Anthony Murphy, humanity endured. The old Taurite fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The students sat in stunned silence, processing the tale of tragedy and triumph they had just heard. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. For every comment that says 88 foot, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.